Hello, and welcome back to Nameless Studio. I'm your host, Tyler, and today we're going to continue working on the small MiracleMan logo piece that we started yesterday. But before we dive in, I just wanted to reiterate a bit on something that I touched on at the end of yesterday's video. In fact, instead of reiterating, why don't we just cut to what I said yesterday? The couple layers that we currently have down, by the end of this, are going to be heavily obscured and erased. And that is the case for a lot, if not all art. There is going to be layers that as a finished and final product, you're not going to see whatsoever. But just because layers have either been erased or obscured or completely covered does not mean that they do not inform the finished piece. Either visually or mentally with the artist as they are continuing to build to that final piece. And that is something to consider both in your art practice and in life. We all have many layers that we choose not to show the outside world, that we might even forgotten about ourselves, that they're even there. But they are, and they do inform the overall presentation that we give the world. So with that in mind, let's continue on. Okay, as you can see, from where we left off yesterday, we have taped off the kind of secondary M for the MiracleMan in the logo. And now I am currently filling in that taped off area with a Neocolor pastel. A very similar red to the Encaustic red that we use for the base M, but we want to use the Neocolor just to give a bit more texture and kind of a different sort of layering sort of impression from each M. We don't want them to look too much like they're on the same plane. We want them to definitely feel a bit more separated when we're all said and done. So we are going to try and fill in every little nook and cranny here to make sure that the red gets the coverage and saturation that we want here. We still want it to be a fairly strong color with not a whole lot of transparency, although there will definitely be some transparency in direct opposition to the very opaque nature of the cadmium red encaustic that we used on the other M. Now we're going to give it a slight wash just to blend that color in with itself, get rid of any of the gestural marks from the actual crayon, and just give a nice solid red tonation to the overall M that we have going on at the moment. So we're just gonna fill it out, and as you can see, there's going to be a little bit of transparency through it all, which is a nice thing. We want these layers to really shine through, and then we're going to be pulling things back quite a bit as we work on from here anyway. But now we're going to sort of fill in some of the open areas of paint, sorry, the open taped areas with the paint to sort of give a little bit more sort of textural elements that we'll sort of work with as we go. A lot of these will definitely be very obscured by the time we're all said and done, but having them on the base like this allows just for a little bit more sort of layering process as we slowly start to build. So as you can see now, we have untaped everything. We have nice clean lines where the M's are. Right now I am taping off towards the bottom here because the actual angle of the bottom M's is flirting out just a little too much. So we want to bring that back a little bit. So this is where fusing things with a blowtorch comes into a lot of play. If you remember, we just sort of lightly washed this with the torch, giving it a very, very, very small fusion to the layer below it, which will allow us to peel off that red a little bit more easily because it's not completely fused with that blue beneath. So we're able to kind of get under that just a little bit. It does sort of peel up quite easy. I am digging a little bit into some of the other colors, but again, we're going to be working with a lot of sort of tear down and wear, so that will work in our favor just fine. But I'm able to pull back this red quite easily due to the fact that I did not do a heavy fusion with the torch. So, and now I'm just kind of going over those areas that we did those slight washes with the Caran Neocolors, just to give it a little bit of wear. I'll be doing this quite often as we're working on here, just to bring in that texture as we start to move forward. Because when we're all said and done, there's going to be a lot of sort of background texture that we're playing with on here. So you'll see a lot of this sort of just almost scrubbing with an X-Acto knife. Not really digging in and pulling up too much of the actual encaustic, but really just wearing down a bit of that Neocolor that has sort of stained that top coat. So now we have moved the tape over to the other side, and we are cutting in on the left side of the M now, doing the same thing we did on the other side, and just pulling that back up just to better balance those angles just a little bit. As you can see at the moment, I've pulled it back a little bit, so even more so on the blue, so we can actually see some of that yellow underneath there. So you're going to get to see kind of how all of these layers sort of interact with each other as we start pulling little bits and pieces away. So there you see we have what we have going on, and now I'm just going to add a couple lines in the M's itself to delineate where they kind of start and stop. By the time we put a few more layers on the piece, these are pretty much going to disappear, but they are good guidelines for where we are right now. And so now, even though we had colored all of that with the Neocolor, I have taped it back off to give just a little bit more potency to part of this M. Seeing all of that transparency on both sides was feeling a little flat. So at this point, we took a little bit more of the cadmium red encaustic and put it mostly onto the left side. And now we're going to go and do another very light fusion layer with the torch. Very, very light. Don't want to fuse very much. I really just want to soften the brush strokes and the texture on top more than anything else. And now we are going to sort of add more of that blue tonation into the background. Very lightly, but again, it's just going to be constantly building very, very thin layers of this Neocolor and then brushing it back in with a little bit of water, just to constantly be building small layers on top of each other. So, and the thing with the Neocolors is sometimes with the crayons, when you start to make that mark itself tends to hold to the encaustic a little bit more. So even if you brush it out, sometimes you will still get that sort of mark line going on. So be aware if you are putting the Neocolor directly onto a clear coat especially, you'll still see a lot of that gestural mark that you're making with the crayon itself, unless you really kind of scrub it back and scrub it down. And now we're going back in with X-Acto knives and sort of pulling some color back out, toning back the points on these M's, so they look a little less like Batman ears, and a little bit more like an M. And given what we're about to do after this, you might kind of see, well, what was the point of scraping this back when we're about to to melt everything kind of up. It's really because as you're planning things out, you might not realize that that's going to be the next step. Or you might need to see how this will look by doing it this way before doing it another. So now that we've pulled some of that up, I'm giving everything kind of a light fusion, just to say, all right, these layers are now complete. We've kind of done what we want to as far as a lot of scraping and moving. And now we're going to take the torch and really start to deconstruct things. So I'm still trying to just lick the top, so I'm not really fusing that blue or the base layer. I'm really just trying to move the red more than anything else. And as you can see on one side, it still has mostly the Neocolor pastel, but on the other side is heavy on the Encaustic. So one side is going to move a bit differently than the other. While the Neo pastels sort of diffuse as you put heat to them, the actual Encaustics will start to bleed and run a bit more. So you'll get a lot more transparency as you're torching the Neocolors. So at this point, we've just sort of moved that red, sort of blurred the line between both of the M's now, so it looks more like one object at this point. And now we're going to go back in with the X-Acto knife and start pulling stuff away. Ever so slightly, just trying to get rid of any of those gesture marks, anything that reads as sort of organic line elements. We want the stark sort of structure elements, but we don't want to have too many line elements going on at this point. We want the central mass to be the focal point, which obviously with the bright red, it's going to be. Okay, so I have to apologize here. I got so in the zone at this point with scraping back that I didn't notice that the camera actually stopped recording as soon as I started scraping back. So there is a big chunk of me scraping away elements and layers that did not get recorded. Which, as you can see from already in the video, I'm doing a lot of scraping away. So there was probably going to be a bit of cut up. But how I scrape this stuff away really did showcase how fusing layers more thoroughly or less thoroughly can really affect exactly how things are going to break apart as you are scraping things away. So from where this video ends to where tomorrow's video starts, there is a big difference in the overall look of the piece. So with that in mind, tune in tomorrow to see exactly what the piece looks like after quite a bit of scraping. As always, I've been Tyler with Nameless Studio. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe for more content like this, and until next time, be seeing you.